Hi, guys. Quick question for you today as we go into the weekend. I know it's been another really busy week of news, but are you a double hater? Are you a double hater? Are you drinking the haterade this election season? That's actually a serious question and a real term that is being used to describe some voters. I'm going to tell you about why I thought of this article because of this week's news cycle in just a moment. But first, I want to start with a little bit of serious news. This has been a big story this week, what we've been watching in the Middle East with these very strange, mysterious attacks that are using pagers and walkie talkies as sudden explosives. This took place in Lebanon, and all eyes and fingers are pointing at Israel as being behind these attacks. Let me just explain that real quick. Lebanon is a freestanding country, all its own. It has its own military. But inside Lebanon is a very active terrorist organization called Hezbollah. And according to the description of these reports, those that were targeted were members of Hezbollah, this terrorist organization. So we've seen a few days of these attacks. There's been a flurry of news headlines about it. One of the things I think is missing from this story that's very, very important is how unique Hezbollah is. When we talk about terrorist groups, we sort of paint them with all the same brush. And by the way, they all are starting to sound the same. They sort of wash over us. Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis. It's hard to keep them all straight. What's really important about Hezbollah is just how organized and militarized it is. It's actually bigger. This terrorist group is bigger than Lebanon's own military. It not only has tens of thousands of members, the last estimate placed it as upwards of 50,000 members. It's also how organized this group is and the sort of firepower it has access to. So when someone says Hezbollah, it is different than these other terrorist groups like Hamas, like the Houthis, that aren't quite as sophisticated, where Hezbollah has access to these resources that these other groups do not. So one of the things I see missing from this story is are these numbers and that context. Hezbollah dates back for decades. It's been designated a foreign terrorist organization by the United States for years by both Democrats and Republicans. And the size of it is really key. The reason why it's important for you to know that is when you hear, well, there's been several thousand attacks, that sort of perks my interest. Okay, there's been several thousand attacks on pagers, but we know there's tens of thousands of members. So who exactly was carrying these pagers? How important were they? Isn't it important to point out that these people were just going about their daily lives, totally infiltrated into the culture, into Lebanon? So they're not separate. They weren't at work somewhere. They weren't doing drills somewhere. They're within the culture, operating as a normal citizen, yet they are tied to this larger terrorist group, again, according to reports. So knowing the size of this group is really key, and understanding why this could be more of an escalation is important. It's a little bit different than these other terrorist groups, and we want to recognize that. So as you're hearing more headlines, if you hear more about it, let's watch for it. And especially going into the weekend, we know that Friday in particular is a holy day for both the Jewish and Islam religions. And so we're really going to be watching this weekend to see, do we see more conflict? Because there tends to be a ratcheting down as we get towards Friday and then a ratcheting up as we get into the weekend. So just words to the wise, something to watch. So let me get back to a little bit of American politics here, because there was another sneaky headline that came across that didn't seem like that particularly that big of a deal. But the more I looked into it, I thought there's really something here that I think is talking about, more broadly speaking, how the American people feel about this election cycle. And here we go as we're counting down the days. And I know for many of us, it can't get here soon enough, and we can't get past the election soon enough. But right now we're in it. We're in it together. So I'm glad to be here with you. The big headline this week was that the Teamsters Union, which is a very prominent union in America, is not going to be endorsing a political candidate. So why does that even matter? Well, number one, it is a big union that represents a lot of different people. In fact, let me just read to you some of the different people that the Teamsters actually represent. Public defenders in Minnesota, vegetable workers in California, sanitation workers in New York, brewers in St. Louis, newspaper workers in Seattle, construction workers in Las Vegas. I can go on, zookeepers in Pennsylvania. So there's a lot of different people that are a part of this union. The union also has a lot of representation, although it's nationwide, in key swing states like Michigan and Pennsylvania. So big union, more than 1 million members, lots of different industries, and a concentration in these key swing states that have decided the past several elections. This is why we're paying attention. Also, the first time in nearly 30 years that this union said, you know what, we're actually not going to endorse anybody. And what's important about that isn't just the action, it's also knowing the context that this union in particular has endorsed Democratic presidential candidates over the past several decades. So they're not only sitting this one out, but they're not endorsing the political party that they're typically affiliated with. So notable, but why? Why is this even happening? Have the Teamsters decided that they're not going to do this? This is from the president himself. He says, unfortunately, neither major candidate was able to make serious commitments to our union to ensure the interests of working people are always put before big business. Ouch. So neither major candidate were actually able to get our vote. What's important about this is Vice President Harris actually just met with the Teamsters Union this week, and there seems to be a variety of different reports. So some of the powerful local chapters have endorsed Vice President Harris, but there's a report circulating that the members of the entire union were polled, and the majority actually favored former President Trump. What's the truth? I don't really know. But this is what's sitting on the table in front of us. A union that's prominent, that's endorsed people in the past, decides, you know what, neither candidate is that interesting or really has won us over. And therefore, we're just not going to endorse one or the other. You know that we've talked about political endorsements, whether it's celebrities or otherwise, and there's a big question about whether or not these endorsements even matter, even for a union. But it's a big media event, and it is true that these unions are large. By the way, many other large unions have endorsed Vice President Harris. And one could say, well, if the union endorses, then perhaps the union members follow. But union members don't have to follow. They can vote their own conscience, whatever that is. Unions in general are not as widely represented in America as they were in the past. If we go back a couple decades, let's go back to like the early 1980s, 1 out of 5 workers in America were a member of a union. Now it's more like 1 out of 10. So they don't quite have as much leverage because they're not representing quite as much of the workforce. But for the folks that they represent, they're still a key part in a lot of their employment contracts. So what stood out most to me is not just about the headline being, well, we're not going to endorse anyone. It was that we've seen this sort of dissatisfaction from voters in general. And what's interesting is we don't have a lot of new polling that was looking at how dissatisfied voters are with both candidates now, because we have a new candidate, Vice President Harris. But if we look back in the past, before that change was made, that was one of the big discussion points, that the American public was dissatisfied with both of the presidential nominees, President Biden and former President Trump. And that's where we get to the double haters. So the Washington Post had an article back in June, again, different world. It was before the first debate and before so many different things, including an attempted assassination, before a change of a candidate. I mean, it really was a different world. But this term still stands because the double haters are the people that, quite frankly, don't like either candidate. And what's important about the double haters is that, and it's funny just to say their name or their title, is that they could actually decide the election. Like, they're the most dissatisfied voters, the most disillusioned. I mean, I can't even read some of the quotes in this article because they're so graphic. I will link to it so you could read it in the show notes. But they're actually the ones that could decide the election, because the elections in the past 2 cycles in particular were decided by just so few votes. Here's the one thing I want to read for you on this. Double haters are by their very nature late deciders. They dislike their choices, dislike the political process, and only tune in during the last minute. Outreach through paid targeting and a robust presence in communities is critical, both campaigns say. So perhaps the number of double haters has changed because we have a new candidate. But my inclination, based on my reporting on Smarter News and interacting with you on a regular basis, is that many are still extremely dissatisfied with both choices because neither are new choices with a new vision of the country. Both say they have that, but voters don't necessarily feel that. And what's so critical is remembering this, that the folks that are in the category as double haters, again, the most disillusioned, least connected, the ones that are most dissatisfied, actually could be the ones that hold their nose and vote and could decide the election in 2024. So keep that in perspective. It goes back to what we covered in Scoop earlier this week when Reince Priebus, a prominent Republican, said we had $1 billion going after just about 500,000 voters in a country of more than 330 million people because the margins are just so slim. So as you're watching the news and as you're watching the actions by politicians as we get closer to election day, you have to remember who they're trying to target. It's not necessarily just their base that they need to show up. They need to get those folks that are double haters out. They need to get those double haters to like them. And the question for us today as we go into this weekend is how difficult of a task is that? And are the double haters actually going to get off the couch and want to go and vote if that's what they have to do? Or is turnout really the story of this election? Because if you don't have critical endorsements, you're not going to vote with your friends, you don't really like either choice, nothing seems new or exciting or different, do you even show up? Showing up is half the story. So just something to think about. And I'm curious, are you a double hater? Double haters unite. Is that a new political? We're double haters. That's where we are now in 2024. I'm going to be watching for the double haters. I'm curious if you're one. And we're going to be talking about more politics and a lot more of these stories on our regular broadcast Scoop, which is every Monday. We set the table for you. We tell you what stories should be on your radar. If you listen to one thing in news, this is the one thing you get to be informed. And it's a good, fun time because it's live. We get to interact. And I love answering your questions. It's made to order news. So you get the scoop on the week ahead, and we're able to return news to the news service that it actually should be for the American public. So thanks for joining us for this mini scoop, and I look forward to seeing you on Monday. Have a great weekend, guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Thank you for believing in quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news. Every time you join us or share or save our content, you help us build a solution in news, and we are so grateful. We have a few other ways you can support our mission, from joining our insider community Scoop, to shopping our gear at our Smarter shop, to just telling a friend. The best way to do any of this is to visit smarternews.com or follow us at Smarter News on social media. Don't worry, we put all of this in the captions so it's easy for you. Plus, we added our email just in case you want to drop us a note. We always love hearing from you. Thank you for helping us deliver news smarter.